Well, g'day. Here we are, take two. I started to make a video just a few moments ago and got rudely interrupted. I was expecting the phone call, I suppose, so my bad. Anyway, I might just start it all over again. So thanks for joining me today. I'm here to put a whole heap of, as I call it, little gems together that I've been collecting over the past couple of years, mostly up here, but basically because when I'm involved in so many flat earth discussions, a lot of people are very new to it, a lot of people are very familiar with it, a lot of people are somehow coming to terms with, is the earth flat? We've always believed it's a ball. Well, trust me, I always believed we were on a spinning ball too. I was brought up with the same indoctrination as everybody else. And it was only until recently, a couple of years back at least, that I had good reason to investigate it for myself. And in fact, it's something I've been investigating as an ongoing thing for many, many years, more than half of my life, simply because I question things, I look into things, and I try to understand things in a logical, common sense, practical way, as well as intuitive. I've got a really strong balance of logic and intuition. So, and I'm open-minded. You know, I can entertain a thought without necessarily having to believe it. And I can work with it. It's like being on a debate team and you're on the team that you didn't want to be on because you believed otherwise. So what you do then is you apply yourself to challenge all your beliefs. Just totally challenge it, and whether you believe it or not, just do it for entertainment's sake, for the sake of intellectual pursuit. And that is why now I consider myself, well, I used to be a 99% flat earther. 99. I'm 100% not a glober, as in being on the outside of a globe. And I've brought my props along again today. I brought my portable dome with a little handle so I can lift it off. I've got all my little bits and pieces here, the giant trees, the lemon sun, move the camera, why don't we? We got the earth. This is pretty much what I'll start with, is the earth, the globe earth, South Pole and North Pole, and a little dot. One of my original videos I made debunking the globe earth. This was my favourite little prop, and it's got a little dot here to represent where we are on the globe spinning earth. 2 seconds. And so let's start with that. Let's go back over that, because that was my original founding video, basically. Apart from talking about being within a dome. That was my very original one, but it wasn't very well thought out. This here being the sun, okay, you've got to use your imagination. And the earth being the spinning ball, okay, spins once on its axis to make a day, so that your dot, when it's shining at the sun right in the middle, that's midday. Then when it's towards the edge there, that's when it's sunset. When it started over here, that's sunrise, okay? And it takes a year for the earth to go right around the sun. Very easy, logical, basic principles that everybody who understands the heliocentric lemon model knows that's how it works. And we also know that the lemon is shooting, the sun, the light bringer, is shooting through space at about 750,000 miles per hour, with the galaxy, which is going around the great attractor at who knows how many millions and millions of miles an hour. But when we bring things back down to Earth level, we know that the Earth is spinning, well, it's spinning on its axis at 1,038 miles per hour, while the speed of sound is about 750 odd miles per hour. So it's almost 1.5 times the speed of sound. That's pretty fast. And it's going around the sun in its annual trip. This is how big everything is in the solar model, the heliocentric model. It's going 66,600 miles an hour around the sun. Let's say 666. Now when you look at the tilt that it's on, 23.4 degrees from the 90, the other angle of that is also 66.6 degrees. So this is why the heliocentric model is considered by most people who investigate it the Luciferian model. It's all about sun worship, Lucifer being the bringer of light, the sun, the powerful angel of God, who we've placed on the throne of God while ignoring who and what God really is. Now I could go into that momentarily too while I'm on the topic, and I will tell you that the sun is a portal between heaven and earth. Heaven being so fantastically bright, or something that Jesus was attributed to have said, that you cannot look upon the midday sun with your eyes without going blind, while the true face of God is 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 brighter than the sun. That is the true Father in heaven. That Lucifer, being an angel, being a portal of the heavenly light onto this physical realm, this physical dimension, dilutes the sun sufficiently so that we can look at it momentarily, but we can't stare at it, except maybe at sunrise and sunset. And it allows enough heavenly light from that divine realm into this dark side of existence so that life may exist. No life would exist without the sun. So now we've got our spinning ball that we've been told we're living on, going faster than the speed of sound. So when we're sitting here, when we know, let's just call this, say, the autumnal equinox, where the days are exactly 12 hours each, and midday is exactly facing the sun. Now we know because we measure it with a clock. Okay, this is not sundial technology anymore. We have physical, mechanical, and electronic, and digital, and all sorts of highly accurate, atomic even, clocks that measure time. And time, for us, we base it on an actual rotation around until we've performed a day. We measure it as 24 hours. Now, you blokes talk about this sidereal day, where it's only 23 hours and 56 minutes. Now, that's very convenient to say why. That our part of the earth is constantly facing the sun as we shift a degree per day until 3 months later, when technically our midday should be facing directly over there. And so the sun is only just rising now at what is actually 12 p.m. for us, because 12 p.m. should always be facing exactly where it was on a 24-hour clock rotation. So when you then try and factor in this sidereal day and say that it's only 23 hours and 56 minutes, then why aren't we constantly readjusting our clocks back 4 minutes per day to make that work? Yeah, it's a half an hour a week, 28 minutes practically. But we don't do it. Our clocks stay fixed and exact and precise. They are a precise measuring device, mechanical. 12 o'clock is always going to be 12 o'clock on the clock. So instead of thinking of this as an apple, think of it as a clock face, a watch. And the 12 o'clock pointing at the sun at midday is always going to be pointing that direction after 24 hours. So when it's around here, it's still pointing over there, and by the time it's all the way over here, it's 12 a.m. is the middle of the night. 12 p.m., middle of the night, facing directly away from the sun here with your little apple. So if you can't grasp that one, I know it's difficult at first, but 24 hours means your little dot is exactly where it was 24 hours ago. Even when it's over here, even when it's over there, even when it's back here, and when it gets back an entire year later, back on your autumnal equinox again, that is when you'll be finally getting midday at 12 p.m, according to the sun. So that's a fairly simple concept I think we can all understand. Now, we talk about centre of gravity, again being the centre of the apple, right in the core, our iron molten core, that is somehow magnetic, even though we know that when metals are heated up, you can easily do that experiment as well. Get a neodymium magnet, the most powerful magnets we know, have it suspended by a piece of string or something fixed that's not going to burn, a piece of wire might be better, and have a nail or a screw or something metallic attached to it underneath due to the magnetics. Then get a blowtorch, point some heat towards your neodymium magnet, and watch as eventually it loses its magnetic properties and the metal object will drop. So gravity and magnetism, and a lot of people do like to talk about electromagnetism as though that explains the force of gravity, even on the flat Earth. I don't buy it. Electromagnetism only works by applying electricity to a metal, which makes it magnetic, and then it still only attracts metal. We don't have a high enough content of metal in our bodies, let alone things that have completely zero, to still be affected by electromagnetism. That's just hogwash. All you need to explain gravity is not this power of attraction of mass, because if we brought in the power of the attraction of mass, there's that little moon spinning around Earth while Earth is spinning on its axis going around the sun, and it's all held together by gravity. Gravity does this. It makes things stick. It's called density, and things just fall until they reach something of equal or greater density, and they find their flat and level place. And it's only when it's acted upon by an external force, like picking it up. But if I drop it again, it will just sink to its common level, density. Buoyancy works the opposite in, say, fluids. So if things contain enough air within them, doesn't matter what their weight is, it's density and buoyancy. You know, if you took an iron ball the same weight as a massive container ship and put that in the water, it will sink because it's containing no air. But because these big ships are mostly full of air, the buoyancy then allows them to float. Density and buoyancy takes the place of gravity. Gravity was invented by the heliocentrists so that people could be sticking to the bottom of the spinning ball and not fall off, not go flying off into space. Now, any experiment you do with a spinning ball, this one I talk about regularly, a soccer ball in a field covered with ants. Ants have got through the air hole, so it's full of ants on the inside as well. Now, if you come along and kick that ball and the ball goes spinning off across the field, just completely ignore every other fact of gravity for a moment. Let's just say it just goes in a straight line. Doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. But anything on the outside of that soccer ball, all those ants, they're just going to get flung off in every direction because they're on the outside of the ball. The ones on the inside are going to get pinned to the inner shell of this ball. Exactly how gravity appears to work. Why rain falls downwards, because it's been pushed down and out, perhaps, if we're inside a big concave ball. And if it's flat, well, it still works the same thing because it just falls by density. So, spinning ball concept, anything spinning, the gravitron ride at the show, or the fair, as you wish to call it, pushes everything outwards. Anything on the outside of that spinning disc gets pushed out. I was just watching this blooper reel, not blooper, this collection of, whatever you call it, just to prove my point again with another person still arguing in favour of the ball Earth, about what happens with people on a carousel. You can look this one up yourself as well, or I might even link it, where they put 3 or 4 kids or idiots, morons, under one of those playground carousels, little merry-go-rounds. And then someone gets a motorbike wheel to speed it up and make it spin really fast. And it reaches a point that people can't hold on. They get flung backwards, they go flying off, they smash into the motorbike, they do all sorts of crazy, life-threatening, stupid things, and I'm surprised they don't break their backs half the time. This is what happens to things on the outside of spinning things. Now let's go to another very simple scientific experiment that you can do yourself. In most high school laboratories, they will have a thing that looks much like this. A bit hard to see there. But it's called a vacuum tube or a vacuum chamber. Something where you can open it up, put something within it, close it up, seal it off, and then use a little pump to suck all the air out, so you create a vacuum force inside of a sealed environment. Now, if you put a glass of water inside a vacuum chamber and you suck out all the air, the water at room temperature starts boiling. Now, it's not hot. That's not what boiling means. Boiling means where it has the gaseous exchange. The same thing happened to this first astronaut guy they experimented with on a massive sized vacuum chamber where they've made somewhere in the States, because they've got billions of dollars to spend on this sort of shit, because they really believe in outer space and space exploration. So they did it with, again, I'm not great on the details, I just know it happened. You can look it up and research it and verify it for yourself. The first guy that they did it to, put him in his spacesuit, turned on the vacuum. He passed out, and they had to turn it off to save his life quickly, and he said the last thing he remembered before he passed out was this bubbling feeling on his tongue. So where you can actually feel the moisture in our bodies, and our bodies are about 80% moisture. He could feel himself boiling alive. So you cannot go into outer space in a vacuum and survive. The water won't allow it. It will boil. That is a very common, simple experiment you can do to prove it, that water inside a vacuum boils. In other words, it all evaporates. It has a gaseous exchange, it bubbles, and it rises off as steam. And you might think, well, that's maybe how we created the atmosphere on Earth in the first place. But no, if Earth was this magic spinning ball made from this giant Big Bang many billions of years ago, and it cooled down sufficiently, where did its water come from? From inside of it? Was it some chemical process making water? Okay, well, let's assume it did. Let's assume. And we know a spinning ball pushes all its water to the outside. I mean, that's how a spin dryer works, by using the centrifugal force to push the water out, and especially if you apply heat to it, that's how you dry your clothes. Now, on a planet-sized thing, spinning faster than the speed of sound and whizzing through space at thousands and thousands and thousands of miles an hour that we can't even comprehend in our heads, we're expected to believe that water formed in massive lakes and oceans and so forth within a vacuum of space. Now, there's no big glass seal around us according to conventional ball earth theory. So how the hell did this water not just boil off in the vacuum? Boil, disappear, dissipate. The second thing that happens with your vacuum chamber experiment is the minute you crack the seal, after turning the pump off, the atmosphere rushes in to fill the void instantly. Again, in a universe-sized vacuum, how do we have an atmosphere on an unsealed planet? Impossible, bro. Impossible. So, how you globeheads can even begin to say that the atmosphere moves with the Earth, with the spinning, speeding ball, the atmosphere just clings to us like Velcro and moves. So it means, you know, the atmosphere that's, well, it's only out this tiny fraction. But if we're spinning at 1,040 miles here at the equator, then out here it's probably spinning at about 2,000 miles just to keep up, to appear perfectly still. None of that makes sense whatsoever. Then we can talk about aeroplanes. Spinning ball going east to west. Or is it west? It's actually going west to east. We're going towards the east. That's why the sun appears to come up in the east. So if a plane takes off in that direction and its top speed is 600 miles per hour, it's actually going backwards at half the speed of the Earth. So it'll never reach its destination. The only way it can ever do it is if it took off and went westwards, and it would get there at half the rate. But we all know that plane flights going east to west or west to east take the same amount of time, give or take a bit of assistance from the jet streams, which are just high winds, which again would not exist if the atmosphere was just clinging to us somehow on this vacuum as we're spinning through space. The next thing then with planes, a lot of people will use this as a reason to suggest the conservation of momentum, to explain why we don't feel this spin. Now again, here's our apple, it's spinning. But it's not just spinning on its axis at 1,000 miles an hour. It's going around the sun at 66,600 miles an hour, and it's shooting through space at 750,000 miles an hour, and the whole thing is going around the great attractor at many more thousand miles. So that's 4 different speeds. So at one stage, let's say, we're going around the sun. wherever you're going to be, at one point you're heading that way, or sort of that way. Then at this point though, you're also going that way. So the Earth is sort of pushing into you there, and here it's sort of dragging you along. None of these speeds are ever felt. None of them. And there's at least 4 different speeds that we can at least almost imagine in our heads, that we have to take into account and say why we don't feel any of them. And you've all seen the model of that they show now of the sun shooting through space with the planets going around it, how that makes sense of where we're supposed to be in this scheme of things now. So you know that there's at least 3-4 different speeds which would all feel completely different apart from the one speed of 1,040 miles an hour. So let's ignore those 3 other speeds and get back to just the spin, the 1,040 miles an hour. And people compare this to the conservation of momentum. So when you're in a plane and you're taking off, you feel acceleration. You feel that because you're accelerating. But then they say this explains why you don't feel any movement, is because once you're at cruising altitude, you're in the plane and you don't feel anything at all. Okay, fair point. You can throw an apple from one end to the other. Boom, boom, inside the plane. And so you say that's what it's just like on the Earth. That's where you're missing the major point, isn't it? On the Earth, not in the Earth. See, you're in the aeroplane. You're not on the aeroplane. You're in it. You're in a sealed capsule of an aeroplane. And that is why the atmosphere inside the aeroplane is moving with it. Now, if you want to compare that with being on the Earth, you have to climb out onto the roof of your aeroplane, and this is only going at half the speed of the spin. It's going 500-600 miles an hour as opposed to 1,040. So if you can imagine sitting on top of the plane and trying to throw the ball from one end to the other, good luck with that. That's what you're trying to compare with being on the Earth. So how can you say that the atmosphere is moving with us as though it's within a sealed capsule, unless you're actually admitting we are within a sealed capsule, like a dome covering which carries our atmosphere with us? Now then, why do we need to be carrying it anywhere if we're in a fixed, firm, sealed environment? Maybe we are spinning like a pizza dough, as Neil deGrasse even says, that it's a bit like a pizza dough. It gets a bit wider at the middle, a bit chubbier. Well, hello, any pizza dough I've ever seen, the more you spin it, the flatter it gets. So, assuming then now, this is our pizza dough here. It's flat. Here's our dome covering, and it could well be spinning, because that kind of makes sense as to the North Pole being the centre point, and Polaris, the North Star, aligns with that, and the whole Earth is perhaps gently spinning around it, and it takes 24 hours to make a total rotation. Now, this makes sense when you consider magnetic north, or compasses like needles, floating needles, point towards the centre. They're also like the spokes of a wheel, like a big wagon wheel. The axial rotation, North Pole, all the spokes point away from it towards the outer rim, which is Antarctica, which is south, and that works with your east and west as well, because east and west are just inner circles within. If you're constantly going east or west, you're measuring that because your compass is always pointing towards the centre. So you are making minor adjustments without even noticing it over the vast distances of a trip around the world by going east or west and ending up back where you started. That makes perfect sense, and it explains how compasses perhaps even work. And because magnetic north, we know, has this slight wobble, it's a measurable wobble as we call it, that could mean that our little pizza dough is actually slightly wobbling, and now you've made a reasonable explanation for why we have tides. And you wouldn't notice it in smaller lake systems or anything, and if you did, it would be only very insignificant. But on the oceanic levels, where we're mostly 70 to 80% water, and these massive oceans, well, that tiny little wobble would make significant changes in the water level without changing anything else apart from tides. I take a breather. Okay, so the very last thing then I want to talk about is the moon. The moon and the earth and the sun. 3 different objects. Now, in a traditional model of the spinning globe, the sun doesn't rise and set. It appears to rise and set because the earth is spinning as we go around it. So the sun is pretty much a fixed centre point. The moon, on the other hand, I mean, it's keeping up with our spin somehow, but it lags by an hour a day. It's a really, really difficult thing to grasp if you are talking the heliocentric model, because you've got all these different motions, impossible motions for the earth, and then you throw in this moon making even more impossible motions, which is why current scientific thought insists that the moon should not exist. And it shouldn't. It shouldn't exist for any particular reason. Now, in a flat earth model, that's how our apple now is flattened out. All of Earth is this infinite flat plain surrounded by Antarctica. And yes, I do believe, if we're going to go with this flat model, that Antarctica is just a local edge, a local barrier. All water stays flat and level within a container. So this big ice wall contains the water, but doesn't mean that there aren't more and more and more continents much further out. And some of them have been discovered and discussed, and we've even seen ancient maps showing many, many other continents, which may even just be the beginning of the reality of the physical plane that we live on, and we're just trapped within a dome probably for our own good. Maybe when we're enlightened enough as one world humanity, we might be permitted to join the rest of the infinite flat community. Now, when you talk about aliens, they're not coming from other planets, because there's no such thing as other planets. They're just glimmering sonoluminescence in the sky. I'm not even going to go into that one today. I'm going to get back to the moon and the moon phases. So let's get back to a 2D model. A flat Earth, yin and yang, sun and moon. When the moon is perfectly full, it rises above the Earth when the sun is setting, which just means perspective, distance of perspective. And here's a perspective thing for you. It's probably not the best angle to show you today, because if I put the spirit level up there, it's exactly level. You can see it lines up with those bricks. When I had it at a different angle before, those beams up there could be looking like this, triangulating. In fact, they do form a bit of a triangle right there, because that beam is also perfectly flat and level. That's perspective. Those things are meeting right there in that point of perspective, which is what happens when things get far away in the distance and they get beyond our range of vision. If you have a powerful telescope or zoom lens, you can bring them back into view. I've seen people doing that with the sun setting over the ocean. In most cases you can't do it because you've got physical things like trees and mountains and whatnot blocking the view, but where you're looking on a west coast at the sun setting and it's a clear enough day, you can keep zooming in on the sun until it's a tiny little pinprick. So it's not actually setting, it is just vanishing into the distance and being obscured by enough atmosphere and other things to make it go dark where we are, and that's when the stars appear. So the moon, because it lags by an hour every day, the next day after we've seen the sun setting and the moon rising being full, well, the next day the moon is actually back an hour. So it's not quite full. It still looks pretty full to the naked eye, and because it sets then the next day after the sun has come up, people are saying, oh, I see a full moon in the daytime. It's not actually quite full. The moon is only full for a split second. So a day later it still appears relatively full, but it's a whole hour later. So with an hour after the sun has come up, you will still see a full moon in the sky, more or less, depending on your local position. And then by the next day, it's 2 hours later, not quite, but about 50 minutes per day. So you can see how, as they go on, it's the perfect yin and yang. When the moon is full, they're completely opposite one another. But the next day, the moon is nearly an hour behind, and that matches perfectly with the tides too. and then it's another hour and another hour and another hour until by the time 2 weeks later it's actually visible at the same time as the sun. That's when it's a new moon, because each time it takes that slight bit of angle, less and less of it is lit by the sun. Now, I've talked about this so many times before, I'm running really quickly out of time here. The moonlight being lit by the sun should in no way produce heat. There's no way why it should. It's just illuminated by it. It produces light, and in a dark and cool area, that light may be sufficient to have a slight evaporative effect and make things in the moonlight appear cooler than the things in the shade of the moonlight. But it makes perfect sense why less and less of light comes from it reflected by the sun. It's not reflected, it's illuminated, simply because less and less of its angle is visible to us here below. And then when it gets past it, it starts waxing again until eventually it gets all the way back around to being full, and it's what we call a moonth. Temperature of moonlight and all that sort of stuff. Yes, there's a logical explanation for all of that. I know my video's about to run out because I get about 31 and a bit minutes before my camera does stupid things. Maybe if I pause it, it might go longer. I'll try and see. Try it. Okay, well, I tried it. We'll see what happens. But if not, well, I hope I've touched upon a few of the basic concepts of flat Earth and how well it works compared to the globe Earth model. Gravity, moonlight, sunlight, seasons. Seasons are a bit trickier. Just quickly, if you viewed the whole flat world as a 24-hour clock, the sun is sitting on the hour hand, and as it moves around, wherever it's midday, that's where the sun is directly above you, and that is your local midday. That's your time zones explained very well. Seasons, on the other hand, is it going to keep going? 2, 3, 52 minutes. Yes, it's going to keep going. Cool. Okay, seasons, on the other hand, on the flat Earth model, are explained by this hour hand then. You know, north being the center point of your clock, the sun sitting on the hour hand, so wherever you are in your local time zone, it's directly above you at 12 p.m. Makes a lot more sense than the spinning ball model, where 12 p.m. is always going to be a degree different every day. The seasons on this particular model are explained by the northern winter. The sun is like on a sliding rule on this hour hand. So it always takes 24 hours to make a circuit, but as it slides in towards the North Pole, which is why then you get 3 months of continual sunlight around the North Pole. That's the summer in the north, and it's much colder in the south. Pardon me. And then for southern summer, it slid all the way back out, the Tropic of Capricorn. I think that's how it works. I always get my Cancer and Capricorn confused a bit, but so it's way out here, and so then the north gets hardly any sun whatsoever, and it's sometimes in perpetual darkness way to the extreme north. But